are you?
Good to see you. I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. Congratulations. This is such fantastic news for the journal.
Of course, the news is wonderful that brings us together today, which is that you receive a special mention in the Pushcart L anthology for your story, The Silent World of Jordi Soto, which appeared in Tint. And maybe you can just take us a little bit to, how you received the news of the Pushcart. What were you doing? How did it make you feel?
As we often do in this day and age, I woke up and I looked at my phone and I checked my social media and my email, and I saw this mess email from Tint, and I read it, and I was still not quite awake yet, and I read it, and then I didn't know what it meant. It's very rare for me to be speechless, but I was. I had no idea what to do with this news because there are things that you sort of kind of expect or hope for. So if you've sent in a story for publication somewhere, you hope that it gets accepted or that you want some. So that part, but this was so completely unexpected, especially because this was from 2024. So there was nothing on my radar, on my horizon that would have even made me think this was a possibility. I mean, even when I'm recounting this right now, I'm kind of speechless. Wait, what just happened? I was amazed. I was thrilled. Yeah.
What do you think in general? What do prizes and awards at the moment mean in writing?
I think for people, I'll speak for myself. I didn't go to college for writing. I haven't taken many writing classes. This is a something I started doing during the pandemic, and so it's a pretty new thing for me. I have a small community of people that I can rely on to exchange things and all, but I don't have the sort of extensive network of people exchanging things back and forth. So in some ways, this can be a very solitary experience. And it's a numbers game, so you can submit a story 30 times, 60 times, 100 times before it gets accepted. So the ratio of rejection to validation can be very low, uh, or high, whichever way you're looking at. Uh, so what this does is it gives you the sort of confidence to keep creating, to keep writing, because there's a group of impartial people, objective people who are looking at your work. It's not your mother, it's not your friend, it's not, but someone who is looking at it and appreciating something about the piece you wrote, right? And it just kind of gives you that motivation to keep going. And that's what I think it means, the prizes.
And if it does that for you, even better. We, of course, hope to see many more stories from you, also published elsewhere. Um, and you already mentioned that you didn't study creative writing and that you're now you have a little circle, you just said. So, what does writing mean to you currently? How did you get to writing?
I mostly jokingly said I was a strange child. I didn't want to become an astronaut or a firefighter or anything like that. Even as a child, if I remember correctly, I had two things I wanted. I wanted to learn a foreign language and I wanted uh, to get published somewhere. So this was something I thought about for a long time. I actually worked in editing for over 20 years, but doing kids' textbooks, kindergarten through fifth grade math. So there wasn't a lot of sort of fictional writing involved, and it was very, in some ways, technical. And for a while, I thought that I had lost the ability or the creativity to be able to write something fictional. I tried occasionally, but I never even finished a short story. So then here comes the pandemic. I worked full time and I was working in a restaurant. Well, the restaurants were all shut down and I had so much time on my hand. So I said to myself, okay, you have no excuse not to do all the things you claim you want to do. And I gave myself a goal, write for an hour each day. That's it. It can be 5 words, it can be 50 words, it can be 500, but you have to write every day for an hour. And I didn't know what I was writing. I didn't know where it was going, but it grew organically. And this time around, I was able to do it. And then it became bigger than a short story, and it became bigger than that, and it became a novel. That's the first thing I ever wrote. Not a short story, not a micro, not flash. It was a novel. And when I realized that's what I was doing, I had no idea. So I had to go and look up what a novel is, like how many words make a novel. It was that organic, the process. So I just it just came out. And the first draft that I wrote was, and I knew I had to go back and do things to it because I was learning as I went along, but it was somewhere around 45,000 words. And I'd learned a delivery novel about 70 to 90,000. So I knew I had to go back and do things. But so that's how I started writing. And then I realized that finding an agent is harder than writing the novel. This one went through an independent press that had a open reading period. But so I thought maybe I'll write a second novel because I've learned so much from it. But as I started the process, I was like, no, maybe I should write shorter stories, independent pieces that could fit in the novel, but let's write short stories so I can get some publishing credibility under the belt. That way, if I'm looking for an agent, there's at least some sort of history to it. And that's how this process started. So it went from novel to short stories to flash to micro. It went in the opposite direction, and hopefully I can go back, but we'll see.
Staying with your writing a little bit, taking it probably to the other perspective, the reader, like you as a reader in your questionnaire that you did for Tint. You said that growing up in India, you still read a lot of books that were like from Western domains. So I got curious, how did you get to these books? What made you curious? And was this the standard that was taught, that kids were exposed to, or was it like a personal choice?
For me in particular, the library resources were limited. I had a school library in the school, but whatever was available, I would tear through it. And we were allowed, I remember this very clearly, we were allowed to, each class was allowed a certain day to borrow books. So, say, for example, it was a Tuesday. Well, I read too fast. And if I had to wait for a book for the next Tuesday, I would be done. Had become friends with the teacher at the library, and so she allowed me to borrow books whenever I wanted. And when she told us to a different teacher, the teacher was like, "Well, he's making this up. No one reads that much and that fast." So what happened is I just ran through all the kids' books, and then I went to the nonfiction, and then and then we had a library open up in the city where I was, and anything I could find. And I think those were the days of very lax parental supervision. So there wasn't this, no one was telling me, oh, this is an adult book or this is not. So I remember reading Bram Stoker's Dracula when I was maybe under 12 or 13, and that was probably not a book I should have read, but I read it because I was just curious about anything I could lay my hands on. And that's how I started reading as much as I could and voraciously.
That was in English, or in which language did you read the book?
Maybe I wasn't looking hard enough, but there weren't as many options aside from magazines and comic books that were in Hindi or in Gujarati. Maybe I wasn't looking. By that point, I'd already started sort of thinking in English and it felt familiar enough. And I think maybe it was just this idea of sort of books being windows to the world and wanting to see different parts of it that were not the familiar, right? Like to be able to see what a kid looked like in England solving mysteries with their pet dog, and you're like, oh, I want to do that, and you're that sort of thing.
The English language as a writing language, I assume, came quite naturally to
Yeah,
you.
that happened maybe a little bit later. Even speaking happened a little bit later. Reading was the first thing. If I had grown up in a larger city in India, chances I would have spoken much more English. I grew up in a smaller city where it was more monolingual, so it was easy to switch into not English. But when I came to the US to go to college, that's when I think the real fluency kicked in. I was pretty fluent even before, but I think the daily practice of just that's where it happened.
I'd also like to talk a little bit about the story that has been awarded in the Pushcart L. What I remember being intrigued by right away was how the title really acts out in the story. Like, we have the silent world of Jordi Soto, and there's silence on just a variety of levels. So the protagonist, Jordi, he doesn't really communicate with his co-workers. Then he's this dishwasher which is just this also very iconic image of an immigrant in the States, right? And then there's a variety of blind spots that we just don't get to see and read as a reader. So we don't really know if there's actually an assault happening from Jordi on, her name is Gayatri, I think. Like, we're totally in the blue here. So I was wondering, these silences that the story that the fabric that is really the fabric of the story. Where do you see these silences in everyday life, in society? Are there so many things that we don't talk about? And what do you think? What could happen if we talked about them?
I reread it after the news came through, and so much of it felt so prescient in what's happening here with the ICE raids on immigrants and all of this. And it felt like, oh, wait, I had written this before any of this happened. One thing about silences is that it's very easy to ignore things that are not happening to you or you don't think they're happening to you. When you see something, say something, act something, when we as a world stay silent to things that are happening around us that are not right, it just it fuels it, it allows it to happen. And I think we've seen in history many, many ways that this has happened. I use this example oftentimes. Like when I read something that tells me, oh, hi Lisa, and then Lisa's this foot tall, this much, this is what she looks like. But that's not how we see the world. I don't meet you and I immediately describe you, right? I want things as another character might see or not see. So you may never find out the entire story of Gayatri. You may never find out what happened afterwards. But that is life, right? We see certain things, we know certain things. We never know everything. The other thing I think about the silences is like sometimes it's very easy to assume that everything is good, everything is bad. Sometimes what these silences do is highlight the complexity of it. So Eva, for example, is a complete supporter of immigrant rights, all of this, and her initial instinct was that Jody couldn't have done nothing wrong, right? So sometimes our assumptions are incorrect. Sometimes this person, if there was an assault, could have been completely out of this feeling of love and wanting to protect and wanting to do something. Not that it makes it okay, but that human beings are so complicated and that there's so much happening with it. And that's what I was trying to really portray in the story is that it's just like we're thinking one thing, it is one other thing, it's one other thing here. And depending on who, where, what time of it sees, the person sees it. And that's what I will always try to do, like go in and out.
And it just works, I think, really well because the reader is pointed right away to being aware of the silences. I think because of the very physical silence of Jordi not speaking. So I think it makes it graspable in a way, the topic. And you already mentioned Eva, the character. So I also wanted to ask you a little bit in regards with her, because Jordi kind of stands out as a character of kind of losing this cliched victim position in the course of the story. So we really see him as this flawed human being eventually, and Eva really has a hard time dealing with this.
Yes.
And so I would really like to just listen to your recording of the story, part 7, to just tune in and get the story paragraph here.
7. The events of the day stayed with Ava. They colored her dreams and populated her nightmares. She felt a compulsive urge to find out the whole story, if only to put an end to the psychological tug-of-war that was tearing her apart. Ava was naturally inclined to align with and advocate for immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants who, she thought, tended to bear the brunt of the socioeconomic hardships in this country, people like the kitchen guys. She was hoping that Jordi was a casualty of some sort of identification error, a victim of an overburdened, slipshod judicial system. This turned out to be a false hope, Eva realized when she uncovered the rest of Jordi's story. Many months after the raid, she met with Alex at a bar, where she recounted the details of the story to Alex.
Okay, so what we just heard is that Eva, yeah, she has a hard time because she wants to fight for immigrant laws. She wants to see that people are treated equally, that humanity is really working, right? She has this greater belief in humanity. And now she's confronted with Jordi being kind of both a victim and a perpetrator. So what do you think? Is there actually a way to nuance the discourse about victim versus perpetrator? How can we approach this?
I think the idea is to keep an open mind and to listen and to hear and to see. In the US in particular, we are so polarized that the same thing, even like we sometimes don't even believe in statistics. Like we think if one person's the president, this much growth rate means the economy is growing, and the other side will think it's in recession. We've become so attuned to thinking like, oh, there is only one monolithic way of doing X, Y, Z. And I think being able to just for a second keep an open mind that someone might have an argument that is worth listening to, because ideas can be good or bad, but they're not coming from one side of the equation or the other. And I think that's really what I wanted to convey through this thing, because I think if I were to extrapolate Eva's thinking and her philosophy, she would never condone sexual assault of any kind on any person, whether it's a woman or a man or like that's not in her vocabulary. So this is in a way a reset, saying, oh, it doesn't matter if you were coming from a disadvantaged background or not, but this is not a negotiable, right? Like for her, this thing, if he was wrongly framed, yes, that's something and that's the idea of it. Like sometimes I want people to live with and see inherent contradictions in other people and in themselves, because that's very human. But to be able to see them is the important part, I think.
And staying with Eva, do you think, in your line out of the story, did she ever find out if the story about Jordi was true?
I think it was true, but she doesn't find out. If I had to extend it further, I think it was true. Like sometimes, we talked about the novel versus a short story, and sometimes the short story is just capturing a point in time, and so is a novel. It doesn't have to always be neatly tied up in a bow. It doesn't have to, and that's where I was going with it, because I want the reader to be able to imagine possibilities as well.
Definitely, we're definitely able to do that with this story. It takes us definitely in different places, wherever I think also our own inklings probably are. We will go there. So to close, if you had at this point in your writing life any piece of advice to share with an aspiring English as a second language writer, what would that be?
I think I would go back to something I said about the ratio of rejection being so high compared to it. Every time that happens, it can be easy to get discouraged, but I always ask myself, why do I write? And for most people who do this, and it's not just writing, but most creative pursuits, there is something within us that needs to be expressed, and it will come out one way or the other. If you stop writing, it will come out in how you cook. It might come out in you making up a cocktail recipe. It will come out. So keep in mind that you do, even though it is a process that comes with its ups and downs and heartbreaks and victories and all of those things, you're writing because there's something within you that is needing to be expressed. And it is a story, it's a thought, it's an idea, it's a person you're creating. And keep going back to the motivation. If it's something you have to do, you cannot, for a creative person, you cannot suppress that urge. So why not channel into something you really want to do?
Thank you so much for sharing. This is definitely encouraging. Whoever is watching this, please just look up The Silent World of Jordi Soto on tintjournal.com. You find it right linked there in our news section and also, of course, in the 2024 issue. Yeah, Sahil, I hope we will hear much more of you, read much more of you. And maybe as a final note, can you remind us where we can actually buy your book?
So in the US, it is available wherever you might buy books online. So bookshop.org is what I always recommend to people because it supports independent books. It's called Love, Loss, and Lost Causes. I also oftentimes ask people to request their local libraries to carry it or their local bookstores. So that's where I would go. But it is available through the publisher, which is rebelsatori.com. It is available on most online sources. And I hope you'll read it.
Thank you. We'll definitely put the links in the video description below. So yeah, thank you and talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.